gratitude, we join in to sing our chant, which we'll sing 3 times. Brother, sister, take your time, go slowly. Listen deep inside yourselves. Simple things are holy. Brother, sister, take your time, go slowly. Listen deep inside yourselves. Simple things are holy. Brother, sister, take your time, go slowly. Listen deep inside yourselves. Simple things are holy. And as you open your eyes, Michael is going to share a song with you, and the words are in your pews. The chorus, if you will, is gonna rise again. So you'll see when that comes up, and if you throw it in an inappropriate time, you'll be correct, because there is no inappropriate time. But it tells a little story about the granddaddy.
Is this working? Does this work? Cool. I remember the year that my granddaddy died. Dawn will rise again. They dug his grave on the mountainside. Dawn will rise again. I was too young to understand the way he felt about the land. But he got to read his history in his hand. Dawn will rise again. These apple trees on the mountainside. Dawn will rise again. They planted the seeds just before he died. Dawn will rise again. I guess he knew he'd never see the red fruit hanging from the trees, but he planted the seeds for his children and me. Dawn will rise again. High on the ridge above the farm, dawn will rise again. I think of my people that have gone on. Dawn will rise again. Like the wood, like the tree that grows in the mountain ground. The storms of life have cut them down, but the new wood springs from the roots underground. Dawn will rise again. Dawn will rise again. Dawn will rise.
Some of those ditties are going to stay in your head all day long. Many of you have heard this quote, "Blessed are old people who plant trees, knowing that they shall never sit in the shade of their foliage. Those who plant trees, knowing that only others will enjoy the shade, are public benefactors." And thank you to all of you that have spent so much of your life in nature doing just that. What a special time of year to celebrate the gathering of 2 congregations into one for this whole month, autumn, with that veil of Samhain being the thinnest, to know how our ancestors can communicate in a variety of ways, whether it's through the cardinals or the voices or the memories that you hear. Each of you are a living legacy, a testimony of the ancestors of the congregations, those people that have gone before you for decades to make sure that this space could be a holy space, a sacred space. You are keepers of the dream started long ago. Now a current combined light as a beacon of hope. Today I'm going to invite you to do a little bit of work. I've always, after 30 plus years in ministry, I've had this little quirky thing. People would come up to me during coffee hour and they'd say, "Oh, I really liked your sermon," or "I really didn't like your sermon." And I thought, it's not to like or not to like. It's whether it has an impact. And the impact isn't you getting to know about my life and what's been happening, although you're going to get a little of that. The impact is how these words can apply to you and how they might resonate in the days and the weeks to come to maybe reflect a little bit differently and reset things. So I'm going to invite you to use these words as a transparency for legacy, the legacy that you desire to leave. The short phrase here is to, what will they remember about me and why? Especially the why. What teachings, what examples do you want to leave behind and why? When I speak of legacy, I'm referring to something that's been transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor from the past. And I'm sure your treasurer would accept you applying a gift of your will, especially a money or bequest, into that definition of legacy as a way to expand this invitation into the congregation. But what have we received from the past, and what are we passing on to the future? Usually we don't proactively think about our legacy for what moves into the future. Bob Woodward last week recently commented that we don't do our jobs usually for our legacy. You do your job because for him, being a reporter was the best job in the world. And boy, did he do it well. And he still does. His high caliber of reporting is a living legacy. And he's already left it to us. And it continues. Vocation is a sense of having a calling, either sacred or secular. So, what has been your vocation? How do you want to refine it in these present years? This is where we might cue up for Barbie the Billie Eilish song, the best song of the year, What Was I Made For? If you haven't heard that recently, call it up on your computer later. It pushes us to think of, what are we here for? What is our legacy to leave behind? And some of you might refer back to that book that many of us were given as a resource by counselors, What Color Is Your Parachute? It was supposed to be a resource to help you find out what your passion was and then connect that to some kind of career so you can continue living your passion. The qualities that make you feel fully alive are those that are going to become part of your legacy. It's often used after we leave this earthly plane in reference to what will be carried on through our family, friends, co-workers. So what type of impact will you leave that will be spoken about with fond affection or maybe a challenge? So with the time we have left on this earth, we can be mindful about what characteristics, philosophies, life choices, ethics, behaviors, and more we would like to become a part of our legacy of remembrance. James Luther Adams, professor at Harvard, Andover, Newton, Meadville, Lombard, and a congregational minister, was an influential Unitarian liberal theologian. Along with Karl Barth and Albert Schweitzer, they were active in the clandestine resistance to the rise of Nazism in the 1930s. His teaching of liberal Christian ethics at Harvard Divinity School are still relevant to us today. One of the phrases that he used, by their fruits you shall know them, echoes the phrase of Jesus, by their roots you shall know them. And this is an entry point at looking at our legacy. Adams turns Jesus' pragmatic phrase, by their fruits you shall know them, into a social, ethical description. By their groups you shall know them. And my twist is, by their roots you shall know them, giving full credit to the ancestors for sharing their legacy with us. Think of our ancestors. Perseverance, work ethics, pride in education, artistic pursuits, and the sacrifices that were made by those that went before us. From the roots of ancestors to fruits where our legacy is passed on, to the groups that help bring us closer to growing a positive perspective for positive actions, large and small. By their groups you shall know them reflects the radical charge James Luther Adams lifts up to functions in the society at large. He said that we should all be engaged in some kind of cutting edge voluntary association. Cutting edge. His example is serving on a public library board didn't count unless the librarian was being attacked by communists. Update to 2024. Now librarians are under attack for making books on systematic racism and gender equality available or not. Adams' advice was no joke. His deep discontent with religious liberalism, and Adams found as he adopted the Unitarian at the time denomination, led him to become its strongest critic. He saw both its secular humanism and liberal Christian branches as caught in a cultural lag. His theology lays in that intellectual groundwork for new religious liberalism, transformed in ways that carry us beyond its enlightenment, formed consciousness. A consciousness prioritizing the rational, the universal, and the individual. All good and wonderful. Rational, universal, and individual. A lot of times, just like young people now, we get caught in the individual, and there's a little bit too much selfieism. In his postmodern version, the priorities become the voluntary, the historical, and the communal, shifting from what? The I to the we. This may be the element of the legacy that you are going to leave behind, that you don't do things just for yourself. You also volunteer and create things for a common good in the bigger community. That beginning is important, the individual consciousness. You develop this interior life, meditation, yoga, good health habits, and then you move to the communal consciousness by adding that social economic matrix of communal life by some of these phrases that might stick with you. Taking time seriously. Protesting the unquestioned social consciousness. And having a social economic matrix of communal life by using those things. This practice is what James Luther Adams used to call us a prophetic people. You can practice what you preach. You can be authentic to your values and application of beliefs turned into action. So what does all that mean? That you question what you do. You question why you sort the plastic bags from the recyclables. You question whether the plastic bags that you take to Target actually go anywhere else except to the landfill where everything else is. You question where your food comes from. You question everything that you see on TV. You question those ads that are stealing your soul right now because you know that they are created by advertiser media pushers. They're created to get your blood pressure rose, and they're created so that you aren't even sure how you can have a discourse with a neighbor that might think differently than you. So this is where a little bit of my personal comes in. If you've ever raised a child, a youth, or worked with teens or young people, they're very good at helping you find your prophetic voice. They will call you on your stuff if you know what I mean, all the time. You'll say something or you'll do something, and they'll be doing something in their world of addictions, and then you're doing something in your world of addictions, and they ask you what is really the difference. So we have been blessed that our 18-year-old grandson moved back in with us in June. I might have mentioned this last time I was here. So now what? We're 4 months in. Unscathed. Unscathed because we decided to do it a little differently this year and this time around. And this can be part of your consciousness shifting also. This can be part of your legacy changing. And so, because my husband of 30 years is here and he's good-humored, I can say that sometimes when he and I are together with the now young adult grandkids, they don't call us this, but I say, let's not be the Bickersons today. We can actually change our modes of relating to our teenage grandson, or the people that you work with, or your neighbors, or your parents that are getting older and have all kinds of issues that they're carrying, and you're trying to be respectful. In my Zoom mindfulness class, mindfulness, direction of one's attention to our experience without judgment. Can you imagine? To just let the experience go without judgment? Judgment and guilt and criticism, put them right here and put them in this plant, and it will grow something fake right behind you. You don't need them. This class, we speak about our brain's neuroplasticity, retraining ourselves to respond rather than react in a more harmonious, loving way. The phrase, the more that fires together gets wired together. So the more often you respond rather than react, you're going to react less often. You all can practice this driving in traffic, because I know you all profile the other drivers around you just as I do. And if you do that a little less and then you just slow down and let the world go by, we'll all get to our destination. And we'll be more mindful. So that phrase that things get wired together, we practice responding with mindful attention. The more accustomed our minds remain in that place, then our behavior changes. We respond mindfully rather than reacting dramatically to behaviors of others, and the way we speak and take actions changes. Sometimes what I do is I just walk to the front porch. I don't say anything. If there's tension, I don't say, you're ridiculous, or I know how to cut that onion better, or this will be better if you use XYZ pan. I just remove myself. And you know what? Everybody in the room knows exactly what I'm saying. And I don't have to say anything. You break the energy and you change it. More importantly, you're being respectful of one another. Because one of my phrases, and it's a flip phrase, but who died made me in charge of everything in the kitchen? Well, I don't know everything. And what happens if something goes a little bit wrong? This can be part of your legacy, that you hold yourself in a space that you're not giving your soul away to advertising and politics, to the neighbors that think differently, to your relatives that are going to be drumming up. Wait till we get past Halloween. Where shall we have Thanksgiving dinner? And who shall we eat it with? And where is the meaning of the day? And how can we suffocate the meaning by arguing over all the details? You can set an example in your legacy. Adams says, read the signs of the times. This is the charge for liberals. The sign of the times is there's too much anxiety. So how do you move that anxiety down? You take some responsibility for yourself. And then he said, time is the essence of God and humanity. Whoop, There went all my atheists, agnostics, and humanists. She's mentioning God. Change it to universe. Change it to energy. Change it to something. But don't get in a thing because the word's not going away. It's our way of looking at it. As he did, he developed this theology that it didn't take an avoidance of the dust and heat of human history, but it took time seriously. This is very important. In his essay, Roots, Ideas, and Human Freedom, The Changing Reputation of Human Nature, he presented this in 1941. Throughout this essay, he presented this moving question: what would create a liberal religion that would be able to effectively resist fascism if it came to the United States? That is a religion that would motivate and organize people for real impact. The times that he was referring to were the times of Nazism. The times that we are referring to have just as much at stake. He diagnoses the problem of being a liberal religious optimist, having an orientation of looking at human nature as well as its overemphasis on the individual, rather than a corrective association, which is a term that he used to look at who do you spend your time with. Now this is the interesting twist. This is where it hits home. Early in his essay, he emphasizes our struggle to engage with the destructive portions of life and human nature, and instead having an over-reliance on restraint and reason. Not at all. It doesn't, even the Buddhists, when they say non-attachment, they don't mean non-action. They mean non-attachment to results, because we don't know what the results are. But that doesn't mean or take away your charge to do something today that makes sense. Here he starts to build toward the main points. Reason alone cannot save us, and he directs us to think of the affections of the heart. It is not by reason alone, but reason inspired by raised affections of the heart. We become what we love. If you love justice, then you will be just to one another. If you love justice, you will fight for against the bullies in all kinds of ways. So we need to reckon with not just the universal force of love, which is amazing, but there's evil and sin and stress of brokenness that exist in the world. The theologians, the liberal theologians, will call sin a brokenness. So if you have a brokenness in that group that you're going to eat Thanksgiving dinner with or argue with, it's up to you to change the brokenness. It might mean that you go sit on the porch. But you don't not address it. You don't stop and don't do anything. And so brokenness in this capacity that exists within each of us. James Luther Adams, and I love being able to have him behind me or above me at this point, to be able to charge all of us to look at what are our raised affections. It's going to take some uncomfortable work. It's going to take some questions. How are we a part of that brokenness, and how can we heal it? So appealing to the intellect, yes, but looking at what our self-interest is to see how our hearts are touched deeply. If your hearts are touched deeply by your grandchildren or your gardens or working for climate change, that doesn't mean that you just get to intellectualize during coffee hour and pontificate on something you read in the Atlantic magazine. That's not enough. And if you don't have the physical wherewithal, connect with associations that are continuing to do the work so that you can raise the affections of your heart to something bigger, and the education of your mind to something bigger to meet the action. So Brian Stevenson, executive director of Equal Justice Initiative in Harvard, says that all of us need to get proximate. What he means is that we need to, as a privileged people, most of us, to care about the suffering of others who do not share that kind of privilege. We have to have a heart-opening experience. This takes an element of commitment. A change of heart has been neglected by many of the religious liberals. What does this have to do with legacy? This is how you're going to be remembered. I'm not going to point out raging grannies in this room. I'm not going to point out those of you that I know that have worked for decades in a lifetime to make the world a better place. This is what people are going to say about you. I'm not going to point out the grandparents that are going to have to zip it a lot because their children are going to raise their children differently than you raised your children. Children are to be seen and not heard is not a phrase we use anymore. And so how do you appeal respectfully to each generation? That's going to be a part of your legacy. I remember a friend's mother, and when she died, and they said at her memorial, she never spoke an ill word of anyone. I was like, what I tell my grandson now is, yes, I'm Sicilian, but you don't pay me enough to perform. And so I don't need to prove that I have this passion and this drama. I can bring it here to you, and I can also tone it down. Don't worry, it's there when I need it. You can focus on changing other people's minds, or you can focus on changing your own legacy. But where it's going to start is a conversion that probably won't feel totally comfortable all the time within yourselves. So when you look at that personal legacy, may you also look at this congregation's legacy. Is it relevant? Is Beacon still relevant? And I know that it is, or we wouldn't have such a great crowd the week before the big day, which is next week, to ordain another UU minister. Talk about hope for the future. We need more UU ministers, as all of you know that have been part of any kind of search. Ministers are, I know a minister that is living in Oregon, comes back to Michigan, serves the church for 2 or 3 months, and then goes back to Oregon. So we need the Reverend Bridgets and more. And so how do you make this congregation relevant in this area? Everybody should be talking about you. The more rabble-rousing that you can cause, the better that it's going to be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. What are you doing? And we heard a person being interviewed on NPR this morning. Well, he already cast his ballot. Great, 1 ballot. Why are we even listening? Why are we listening to somebody being interviewed that said that he sent in his ballot? 1 ballot. We need to help our neighbors drive to wherever we need to be brave enough to be able to put out the signs. We need to know that in our legacy it's going to be that we stood up for what was right and true, whatever you believe that is. This is not the time to be quiet. It's the time to be Sicilian. Change, looking with clarity. As Elizabeth Hamilton described about Alexander Hamilton in the play, he was writing like he was running out of time in those last years. James Luther Adams refers to taking time seriously. Yes, the Northern Lights, most of us saw them. We got a couple of opportunities. We missed the May one, but we saw the one a couple weeks ago. We're past the full harvest moon. The moon's even trying to give us light, the most light that the moon's given, trying to show us the light. Now we take our legacy seriously And now the time at hand is precious. Don't wait. No guilt. Guilt is useless. See me offline if you want to hear more. Shame, no shame is needed. How we use the motivation of love in the biggest way. Take actions fueled by responsibility of ethics, and then your legacy will more than count. Make them talk about you now. Why wait? So be it. Would you please stand as you are willing and able to sing 168? One more step.